process that DPME has been working with the SAMEA and other partners in the space of evaluation since around 2021. We are launching these guidelines in order to create awareness amongst the evaluation practitioners and the stakeholders. I request that we put up the agenda. If you can help, please. While we do that, I want to convey the apologies of the minister. Minister Ramkhopa could not be able to join the launch this morning. So we have amended the agenda or the program for the day. The Director General, Dr. Robert Nkuna, will address the launch session. Can we put up the agenda, please? So that we have the same point of reference.
The DG Mashamba Koketso is projecting.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. That is the revised agenda. We have already conveyed the apologies for the minister. The Director General will address the launch session, and then we'll have remarks by the chair of the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association, Mr. Kwiza Salubonde, and then the team will present the guidelines and explain the two guidelines. That is Prof. Van Goldman and Ms. Jen not Norris, and also I think Haukelo, you'll join that team because you are in the lead from our side. Then we will take a case of application of the one of the guidelines, the case that was done by the Department of Science and Innovation, to be presented by Rosalind Motiba, to just show the practical application of the ecosystem health guidelines in the National Water Research and Development Innovation Roadmap. Then we will open the space for discussion and then close the meeting. Just some remarks from my side. You may have learned from the recent major disasters such as COVID and the floods that there are disproportionate implications on different segments of the society. Same can also be said about the level of vulnerability to risks of climate change and the implications of the just transition that we are trying to implement as a country to different segments of the society. So by just saying that, I'm trying to suggest that we need a more nuanced application of policy and the way that we do evaluation of effectiveness or functioning of policies or programs of government need to take these things into account, to differentiate the different implications for different people. When we formulate recommendations about how to improve how programs work, we should take those things into account, that there are differences in ways that different groups in a society are impacted by programs. So that is why these guidelines have been developed. One dealing with the equity aspects, the other dealing with the changes in terms of the climate change and the environmental sustainability and how those affect societies. So there's a lot of work that has happened in this. That's why I want to start by acknowledging all the contributors and collaborators that contributed to the two guidelines, starting with the hackathon in 2021, and the team from SAMEA, DPME officials, especially from the evaluations team, and the social cohesion led by Joseph Hilda there, and on the evaluations led by Tokozile, and then the Department of Social Development, the National Development Agency, and other practitioners who have helped to make input and also review the draft guidelines, these guidelines when they were still drafts. So there's a lot of work that is went into these things, a very collaborative process, one must say. So from the DPME, just to explain from the mandate point of view, DPME has a mandate to build capacity for using evaluations to inform planning, budgeting, policy reviews, to improve performance and impact of government programs. But in doing that, we are guided by the National Evaluation Policy Framework. I'll remind you, it was adopted in 2011, but then updated in 2019 to provide minimum standards for evaluations in the public sector. So we are required, in order for us to effectively implement this policy framework on evaluation, to do what is called institutionalization of practice. But we do that through developing a common language or common practices, or developing standards, and then we code this in the guidelines. The guidelines that we're presenting now is one example of how to institutionalize a practice, so that we can all speak the same language, we can all follow the same kind of practice, and then replicate practice. We do this through guidelines, we do this through templates, and then the training programs on evaluations. So because DPME is the custodian of the policy framework on evaluation, we also have a responsibility to maintain these tools to ensure that they stay relevant and also progressive. So that's why all the time we spend time testing if these evaluations are still relevant, to see if there is a need to update them. Then we update them when there's a need to do so. We also identify gaps together with our stakeholders to introduce new guidelines and practices that will help to improve the practice of evaluation. But also where things have become irrelevant, are no longer relevant, we then retire them. We don't use them anymore, then we can take out the evaluations, the guidelines out of use. But those that think that they can still use them, they can continue using them. But there's a constant need for us to improve how things work. So today we are going to learn more about these two new guidelines. And having said that, I want to invite the Director General of the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation to address us as an opening address. Over to you, DG.
Good morning, DDG, our chairperson for the day, and of course the leadership of SAMIA and other distinguished participants. Let me also start by apologizing on behalf of the minister, who initially would have loved to be part of this important occasion, but the minister has another engagement which is clashing with our own event today. So I apologize most sincerely for absence, but believe that we are still on course, even in the absence of the minister. Now, colleagues, it's very important to note that what we are launching today is an outcome of what we discussed previously when we engaged with SAMIA in the last biennial event, which testifies that the relationship between SAMIA and DPME, and indeed other partners, is not a talk shop. We are not meeting to just talk, but we have agreed to pursue a programmatic relationship, that at every turn when we meet, we need to come up with something that we're going to implement together. And in the successive meetings, we need to evaluate progress on what we would have agreed to do together. So this is a very big deal that at this point in time, we can be proud that we are not just meeting to agree to meet again, but we are meeting to do something purposeful. Now, here we have agreed to pursue, or we've been pursuing, matters of common interest that go beyond the two organizations, but also touch on everything else in South Africa. So these guidelines are not about the organizations and the experts who made them, but they are clearly about bread and butter issues, the kind of issues that as society, as South Africa, we should be grappling with. Now, it will not end there. I hope that out of this launch today, we will also talk about the diffusion, how we are going to take the guidelines to their proper conclusion, and that is implementation across the board, not only within government, but also outside of government. So what I want to see coming out of this engagement, this launch, is a clear plan of action of what is it that we're going to do to ensure that when we meet next time, we can assess progress and impact, how we are turning lives, and how we are improving on the management of the environment in our country. Environmental management in our country has become a very big issue because beside natural disasters, we also have many man-made disasters. And I think we need to pay attention to that part because it turns out that even the natural disasters become very devastating because of man-made kind of behavior, the kind of things that we do. We learn nowadays that when there is flooding, the kind of devastation that you see arises because you have rivers that are not being maintained, people staying in rivers, dumping of rubbish in rivers. So there is just quite a lot of things that we as humankind, as citizens, are doing to aggravate the impact of natural disasters. So I want to have a sense of what is it that we're going to do to start focusing on man-made kind of challenges that we experience. We can't do much with nature, we can mitigate nature, but it starts with us behaving in a particular way. So this must not be an elite pact. I know we don't have the kind of resources that I want to have so that we can go all out and make sure that these guidelines are also understood and adhered to by other stakeholders. And I will also share my own impression on the kind of stakeholders that we need to prioritize and engage with to make sure that we get everyone on board. Now, just one last thing as I conclude. I have raised something that I consider very important with SAMIA, which I pray we will pursue with some vigor as we go to the next biennial so that we can report at that point that we have done something in terms of that. And that is about the professionalization of M&E. I spoke to the chairperson of SAMIA about it, that we want to work with SAMIA on that. Because if you look at the government's professionalization document, DPME has been asked to lead in the professionalization of M&E, that is attempting to create a body that is going to look into professionalization in this important space. When I spoke last time, I indicated that if we don't do that, we run a risk of a situation whereby people are just dumped into M&E. So when the DG does not want you in a particular function in a department, then you are sent to deal with M&E. So I think that we need to do something about that and start some work. I've asked some colleagues internally within the DPME to start working on some ideas of what it is that we can do. I know that this is not for discussion today, but I'm just flagging it out that in addition to the work that we've done hitherto, let's also pay attention to that. And I will request maybe a bilateral with Samia in the near future, in the next few weeks or so that we can also pay attention to that. Because what it does, as we professionalize M&E, we then start to attract more and more people who want to specialize in this area. And that will go a long way in ensuring that we make the necessary impact. So Chairperson of SAMIA, the EXCO of SAMIA and other experts, we may not necessarily have to discuss the latest point that I have made. It is in this interregnum, but I think that in our next engagement, we'll have to pay attention to it so that everything that we do must coalesce into something concrete. So I look forward to that. On that note, I will wish to congratulate the experts who have put together this work. I know people like Prof. and Goldman have been hard at work. It's one person who have said that even though he's not in government, he will keep in touch with us. He will play a role to bridge the gap between government and what the entire community is doing, which is something that we must be grateful for Ian and other people who are involved in this activity. On that note, colleagues, congratulations. I wish you the best of luck. And as I've said, let's come up with something concrete that will take us forward. And let's reach out to the broader community so that whatever we seek to achieve can be achieved through a wider engagement with other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, Gigi, I think loud and clear. Can I invite the chair of SAMEA? I see you, Tekiza. Please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, the DDG, the DG, and all distinguished guests. Thanks, and it's really my pleasure to be here with you this morning. I think the reason why we're here is something that I find extremely exciting. If I can just rehash something that you have said, when you spoke initially about the issues of climate change, the issues of equity aren't things that, we read about in books anymore. You just have to turn on the news to realize that these are issues that we are experiencing every day and things that need to be addressed through evaluation. So I think, or monitoring and evaluation. So it's really my pleasure to be part of this today. But by way of a background, I'd like to just tell you, who is SAMIA? Some of you may know, some of you may not know. But SAMIA is a voluntary organization of professional evaluation. And we occupy an important space in M&E in South Africa. And that's because we're independent and we're a credible voice for all M&E practitioners. We draw our membership from individuals working for and in government, in academia, in civil society, consultancies, donor agencies, private sector, and even students. And many of you are actually in this meeting today. And what SAMIA has a vision to do is for M&E to contribute to equitable and sustainable development in South Africa and more widely. And that vision is to contribute to a community that is vibrant, that guides and seeks to use M&E as both a tool and improve it as a discipline and ensure ultimately that it's used for equitable and sustainable development. And one of the words, the buzzwords that have been coming up today are around collaboration. And this answers the question of how SAMIA does the work that SAMIA does, given we're a voluntary organization. And one of the ways that I'll highlight now is through collaborations. We look for key collaborators and partners from many different organizations, and one such is DPME, as we discussed here today. And the importance of collaboration, we find, is that's the only way we can build innovative and support capacity building here in South Africa and beyond. So SAMIA and DPME entered into a collaborative relationship in 2012 and have been working closely ever since. As the DDG said, and the DG said, excuse me, we've collaborated through the conference and through different activities from emerging evaluators right through things that support experienced evaluators. And one of the things that makes this collaboration work is that it's a structured collaboration. We work on an action plan and we work based on mutual respect and collaborating on capacity development and practical implementation of innovative tools, such as why we're here today. So these guidelines have been a collaborative effort from SAMIA, DPME, and other stakeholders who are here today. I know when you start naming names, you run the risk of missing people. So just allow me to focus on those two. And the guidelines on transformative equity and climate change and ecosystems health are as a result of that collaborative effort. The work is important. The work makes M&E continue to give a contribution to addressing these systemic issues that we're facing, addressing equity. And we believe, both as SAMIA and DPME, that if we use these guidelines, we are able to achieve a just transition, as we've been speaking about, both in policy and in practice. And this will contribute to ensuring that humanity will survive and thrive. If we use these guidelines and apply them systematically, it'll be important for us, and it's a way for us to mainstream gender, climate, and ecosystems work in our work. So I think based on that, I'd like us to look at these guidelines and see them not as things that sit on the shelf, but things that require all of our collaborative effort now to see how we can implement them. There are various mechanisms that SAMIA and DPME have undertaken. One such is this, launching this, providing capacity building events around how to integrate them. And I look forward to how we can continue to find other innovative ways to see how we implement these guidelines and moving from having a paper to something that really makes the impact that is promised on that paper. So without further ado, I'd like to invite you all to continue to collaborate with SAMIA to bring your innovative ideas, to bring things on the table through the conference, through different discussions. We're open to working with you as we work for you. And yeah, very excited to be in this space. Wishing us all the best. And I say us because it's, again, a collaborative effort. And thank you for all who've been part of this work. And may the impetus and the energy that was used through it continue to guide us in making these something that really continue to provide a big impact. And I also believe that this is something that not many people have done. If I dare say that we're one of the first to spearhead such guidelines. So may we continue to pave the way and be torchbearers in ensuring that our communities are well served and taken care of, and humanity continues to survive and thrive. So with that short address and with my thanks and appreciation for the team that has worked, I'll hand back to the chairperson for us to actually get into the meat of things. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Chair of SAMEA, Ms. Kwisa Salbonde, for those kind remarks. I now invite him that will explain the guidelines, Prof. Ian Goldman, and then Ms. Jen Norris. And so hello, you can come in where you want to add. Thank you.
So, colleagues, this is a really important day, and it's really a privilege to be with you. This is a product of so much work, and I just want to name just some of the authors who are on this call. As well as Jen and I, there's Tracy, Jauchelo, Sinentlantla, Francini, and Zuleika, who have all been instrumental in these guidelines. And in terms of the guidelines were actually initiated in the hackathon, as has been mentioned, and there were over 40 people that were involved in those 2 weeks working on the guidelines. They then were refined and shared with a number of peer reviewers from national and international organizations. We've been piloting them in 2 evaluations, and we're going to hear about one of them later. And we're now at this point where these guidelines have been formally issued, and we really welcome the challenge from the DG that now we've got to work out how to make sure these are taken up widely. And the issues, of course, the two issues that we're trying to deal with here, which relate to the just transition, that's the equity side of the just transition and the climate and ecosystems health. These are immense issues which are affecting us now and are going to affect us even more going forward as global temperatures rise and climate disasters start to become more common. And so we have to mainstream thinking on these issues into all our decisions now if we are to stand a chance of saving a habitable planet. We're seeing the incredible temperatures that are happening across the Northern Hemisphere, and it would happen in the Northern Hemisphere more because there's more land in the Northern Hemisphere. In the South, there's more ocean. We're seeing those temperatures, we're seeing the hurricanes, we've had the floods in Durban, we've had the cyclones in Madagascar and Mozambique here, we've had the droughts in Cape Town. We have to transition to climate and ecosystems health, but we have to do this in a just way, considering distributive justice, the restorative justice and procedural justice, which are core in the framework for a just transition which South Africa is taking forward. And how can planning, monitoring and evaluation and learning support a just transition? We have to move away from nature as something to just be exploited, as well as people that are just there to be exploited, towards an understanding that only if we have a healthy ecosystem can humans thrive, but that we have to address structural social deprivation. Our economy, inequality and poverty does not happen by accident. It is a direct product of the type of capitalist system that we have. So how, from the planning, monitoring and evaluation and learning, what can we do? One solution is to mainstream these issues into all evaluations. So all interventions are looking at all interventions are thinking about how they can be regenerative and how they can respond to the needs for social justice. We need to consider the climate and ecosystems health side, and we have to have a transition which is socially just and equitable. And the same exploitation, which is leading to exploitation and destruction of climate and ecosystem, is the same exploitation which is leading to the extreme poverty and inequality that we have. This is well expressed in this diagram, which relates it to the Sustainable Development Goals. These bottom goals, 15, 14, 6, and 13, are the platform, the biosphere, on which everything depends. Our society is based on that biosphere, whether it's from food, whether it's from the air we breathe, whether it's from the warmth, the materials for our clothes, etc. It's all based on the biosphere. And then our economy is based on our society. So if we do not have the platform in our biosphere and the just society, we will not have an economy which will survive. So I'm going to just introduce the climate and ecosystems health criterion, and then Jen will talk about the transformative equity one. So when we started on this work, we started off talking environmental sustainability, but then we realized that we needed to be more proactive than that. We needed actually to find ways to bring climate and ecosystems back to health. So climate health is global temperatures returning to safe levels, and already at 1.2 degrees, we're seeing immense problems of climate problems happening. We need the capacity of ecosystems to remain stable, sustainable, and resilient to external influences, so that they can support not just humanity, but the diversity of life forms and the benefits to society which underpin our whole world. And the interventions that we are looking at and the interventions we're evaluating, they can be degenerative. They follow business as usual. They take resources, they make things, they use things, and then they create waste. And that is what is destroying the planet. Or they can be neutral, where there's just limited efforts to green the current system, but the current system is already so out of equilibrium that this is not good enough. Or they can be regenerative, where we move towards mitigation and regeneration. And we have to try and move towards regeneration if our children and our grandchildren are to have a planet that they can enjoy. So the climate and ecosystems health criterion asks, does the intervention degrade or regenerate climate and ecosystems health? And how will it be affected by the changes that are happening in climate and ecosystems? And there are 3 dimensions we're looking at. So as we evaluate an intervention, what impact will that intervention be having on climate and ecosystems health? What is it doing in the way of transport, in terms of use of resources, in terms of ecosystems destruction? Then what will the effect of the impending climate crisis and ecosystems breakdown have on the intervention? What effect will floods or drought or fires have, or social crises that are caused by these other crises? What will it have on the intervention? Very few interventions are not going to be affected by these types of crises. And then what is the capacity of the intervention to adapt and be able to respond to these changes that are going to happen, whether we like it or not? Some of these changes are baked in for the next 100 years. And this is actually how we describe the criterion in the guideline. And I'm not going to read it all in detail, but you can see that the first dimension is about the impacts, degenerative, neutral, or regenerative, on climate and ecosystems health of the resources consumed and the waste/pollution generated. The impacts of climate change and ecosystems degradation on the operation, outcomes, and sustainability of the intervention. How is the intervention affected? And then the extent to which the intervention design facilitates or inhibits the capacity of the intervention and its beneficiaries to adapt. And we can have to work. So we're going to ask these 3 questions, and in all interventions, there will be some effect of one of these dimensions. It may not be all of them, but some of them. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Jen.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, esteemed colleagues. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you now on the transformative equity criterion. So as Ian said, during the hackathon, we had a group that was focusing on looking at issues of equity. And in that discussion, you can move to the next slide. One of our first tasks was really to understand what we mean by equity, or whether we wanted to focus on equity or on equality. And this image here really brings us, is something that we grappled with and really brought us to this point of focusing on transformative equity. That transformative equity is really looking at, and the image of justice is really looking at making those changes within the systems to ensure that all people have access to the services, to the benefits that they deserve, and that if we focus just on equality, there still will be these differences between people. So equity is our way towards a more equal society. So the criterion, transformative equity, is defined as the extent to which an intervention's objectives, design, implementation, and impact contribute to or do not contribute to addressing systemic inequities and promoting a more inclusive society. For this criterion, we have 5 dimensions. So the first is population or populace, which is really looking at the who in terms of who benefits and who loses. So this is really emphasizing the intentional inclusion of those that are traditionally more marginalized, who have often been excluded from discussions, from benefiting from social initiatives. Then we have the dimension of content, cause and effect, and this is the how. So looking at really trying to understand the systemic structures that perpetuate inequities, and looking at how inequity plays out within a specific context, and then how the intervention and also how the evaluation itself is responding to those inequities. What is the transformative effect that it is trying to produce? Then we have space, which is the where. And this is really taking a look at the spatial inequities that are still so prominent within South Africa and are the legacy of apartheid. So this is looking at how, in terms of the geographical and spatial factors, how are these affecting issues of equity? How are the effects of the program differing in these different spaces? Then we have the content and intention, and this is the what. So this is looking at the transformative change potential of an intervention in relation to equity, whether it was intending in its design to promote transformational change in terms of equity, and then also similar to the how, like, is there that potential in terms of its effect? And then the timing, or the when, has a couple of different components. So part of it is looking at or trying to understand the social and political discourse, what is happening at the time of the intervention, as well as the time of the evaluation, and how is this going to affect the results, or how the results are being seen. But then also looking at how the issue of equity has perhaps changed over time, and then the durability of the transformative equity results. So similar to the CEH definition, this is how it is presented in the guidelines. So we have the criterion on the top, and then we have an explanation with a bit more description of each of the dimensions. And in the notes, we provide some further explanation, really emphasizing that by including transformative, we are underscoring the assumption that reaching equity requires a transformation of systems and structures, both of the evaluand and of the evaluation approach, and that systemic inequities refer to the ways systems have been designed, established, and maintained that perpetuate inequities. So this is recognizing the historical context of South Africa and our intention of really creating transformative change. So the two criteria, we have then a set of guidelines that within which they're placed, and these in developing the guidelines, we used the DPME guideline on developing TORs as our structure. So this places the guidelines really within DPME's evaluation approach and following the design of an evaluation. Next slide. So in terms of how the guidelines for the two criteria are described, we first start with the understanding of how the issue of either climate and ecosystems health or of equity relate to the intervention, and then using that as a way to consider how to develop or to adjust the purpose statement to reflect the either or both of those criteria. And then once the purpose has been defined or adjusted to reflect these criteria, then how does the scope have to be adjusted to then also incorporate these two new criteria? The guidelines then also provide guidance in terms of how evaluation questions can be adjusted. So we have several tables or we have a table in each that goes through the different evaluation types, the more traditional evaluation questions per type, and then how those questions can be adapted to reflect the two criteria. And then related to that is guidance in terms of how to think about the design and the methodology to be applied, guidance in terms of considering the resources required, and then issues around management and use. And one thing to point out in particular with the guidelines on equity, but also for CEH, there is also a lot of guidance in terms of involvement of stakeholders and really ensuring that stakeholders become a broader, it's a broader field to really ensure that the stakeholders represent those that are coming from the more marginalized or out of normal scope of the stakeholders, so that we can really kind of act on the issue of the who part of the equity dimension. So this is an example of how the criteria can be added to evaluation questions, looking specifically at implementation evaluation. So if we think about the typical core evaluation question for implementation evaluation, looking at, is the intervention being implemented as specified? And then we've added in some suggestions for incorporating the two criteria. So for equity, how does this differ for different populations or different geographies? And then for CEH, how is the implementation affecting the climate and ecosystems health? And then for more in-depth questions, as is shown, there are then some further suggestions to really get at the different nuances of the different dimensions within each criteria. So in the past 2 years, as we've been developing the guidelines and finalizing them, SAMIA has conducted 2 trainings on the guidelines, one with the group of evaluation pilots, and then one just recently with the SAMIA capacity building workshops. We are looking to partner with DPME and with the National School of Government to develop a more formal training program on the guidelines. As Ian mentioned, the criteria are being piloted now in 2 evaluations, one by DSD and one by DSI, and we will be hearing from DSI just now. And SAMIA really looks forward to continuing to support the adoption of the criteria into all evaluations conducted by government. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's someone who hasn't muted. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think we should just go straight to the presentation by DSI. Roslyn, if you can come in, then Kagalo, you want to add? Please come in.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to my fellow presenters. Yes, I just wanted to add that Jen just highlighted the collaborative training that we have undertaken on the guidelines, and just to share that there are plans coming forth. We are just trying to raise some funds to ensure that we conduct more trainings for particularly us government officials, to ensure that we have the ability to practically implement, as DG indicated, the guidelines throughout the evaluation processes. So I just wanted to flag that colleagues must be on the lookout. We will be soon conducting trainings internally in collaboration with SAMIA to ensure that we are able to integrate climate change ecosystem health and also equity guidelines in our evaluation process. Thank you.
Great stuff. Can I ask Selom Kwena to mute, because you keep on popping up, yeah, can we go to Department of Science and Innovation to get the presentation? Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairperson. Okay, so basically from the Department of Science and Innovation, we'll be providing a reflection in terms of the pilot that we are actually undertaking, basically in the application of the guidelines. In terms of what I'll be talking to, it is basically about what is the evaluation all about, where are we now in the process of the current evaluation we are undertaking, and also just looking at what worked well when we're applying the guidelines and the lessons learned thus far, and also just going forward, how do we integrate the guidelines into future evaluations that we will be conducting. So the evaluation is basically on the implementation, is an implementation evaluation of the water research, development and innovation roadmap. So this roadmap, it provides a structured framework in terms of just looking at the research and development and innovation activity within the policy context, strategy planning, in terms of just using water resources and managing water resources within the Republic. And the purpose of this evaluation is to assess whether the roadmap was implemented as intended. Are we doing exactly what we wanted to achieve when we started? And also, we are going to look at the findings of the evaluation that are going to help us to better come up with decisions and improvements on the roadmap, as well as similar roadmaps. So in terms of where we are at, so the process started in the last year in July, where the terms of reference was refined. And then from there, we had to present that to our bid specification committees. These are internal processes. And then we had to advertise the tender after the approval. And then we got 5 bids, and then we were able to appoint, and then we are now in implementation. So this study is not yet complete. So we are still in the implementation. So maybe even before I go there, into just to talk about the current processes, I think one of the things that happened in the process is that we actually spent some time during the initial phases, especially in terms of our terms of references, and also just to ensure that we get the criteria right before we continue with the study. And what has worked well is basically that we have had buy-in from senior management that is responsible for planning, monitoring, and evaluation within the DSI. And then the guidelines assisted with examples, especially of the relevant questions that we also needed to include in our terms of reference. And I think over and above the guidelines, it also assisted that in terms of the training that was provided, especially from SAMIA, assisted, and we also have a steering committee. So in the steering committee, we also have SAMIA also supporting this, so that is actually very valuable for us. And the other thing that is also important that we added that is normally that we normally don't do with other evaluations is in terms of our peer reviewers, because we'd normally have a peer reviewer that would be focused on just the methodology, and then we'll also have the sector expert. But this time, we also have a peer reviewer that is experienced in the CEH and also in the implementation of the equity. So that is very helpful. And so what has happened at DSI is that we are also in a process of finalizing our evaluation guideline. So the evaluation guideline has been revised to also include our CEH and the equity criteria, so that in terms of the next evaluations that we conduct, that we also include the criteria. And the other point maybe to mention in terms of our planning cycle, we as the DSI also include interventions and indicators for promoting like our just transition, ensuring that there is social inclusion and responding to the ecosystem breakdown. So this water RDI that we are actually evaluating is one such instrument, as well as the waste RDI roadmap. We have others, such as in the bioeconomy, that also contribute to that. And Okay, in terms of what has not worked so well in applying the criteria, I guess because the criteria was new, we had a number of questions and back and forth with our bid specification committee, just to make sure that whatever it is that we'll be asking would be also have responsive bids. And there was a delay in finalizing the terms of reference due to internal processes, but it's also expected because this is also, we are implementing something that is actually new. And how will the criteria or the guidelines be integrated into the future use? So the first thing that we are doing right now in the implementation is that we are tracking the lessons throughout the whole process. Basically from start to finish, we are basically tracking those lessons and recording them in terms of the learning framework that has been developed. So I think that will actually be helpful, especially at the end of the evaluation. And I've also mentioned the issue of the DSI guidelines that we have revised that will be tabled at various management forums. And what we'll also do internally is just to make sure that there's continuous advocacy and making sure that people are aware of within the institution as to what we are doing and what the expectations will be, and also ensure that the criteria is considered, especially in our planning processes within the department, and ensure that all our planned evaluations going forward include the criteria. Thank you.
No, thanks very much for that. I think it's useful for all of us to get a sense of the practical application of these guidelines and the nature of obstacles that might be encountered. Obviously, they will be applied in different situations, organizational situations, or programs or intervention situations. Each time, there might be new issues, new opportunities for finding innovative ways to apply them, as Jan has requested, but also there could be challenges that colleagues need to be dealing with in the process of applying the guidelines. Thank you very much. I now want to open a space for comments and questions. There's also a chat if colleagues wants to use the chat, but I will get us, if you can raise your hand so that we can note if you have a comment to make. I do have a few comments, but I just want to give others an opportunity to comment. Other than that, if I can't see any hand, so maybe I should make my own comments. Dr. Grazer.
Thank you, Chair and DG and colleagues. I think we must congratulate the team that worked on this. It will really assist us in making sure that we have better quality evaluations and that the interventions that we introduce are actually much more impactful in terms of the climate agenda as well as equity issues. I just wanted to underline, and I think this is also going to assist us, these sort of principles that have been identified, even as we look into the planning instruments. So I think it's applicable, obviously, to evaluations, but even some of this work can also be applied in other contexts. So thank you for that. I just wanted to underline the point made by our colleague from Ms. Motiba from DSI around the bid specification committees. Because sometimes we put forward these guidelines and everybody's happy, and they because we have had an experience where a BSc removes the qualitative criteria that are included in, as we seek service providers to undertake certain evaluations. So one would suggest that, as DG said, we need to look at how we're going to implement these. We might need to also do a orientation or standards around even the BSCs, because otherwise we might find that the BSCs start to remove some of these progressive criteria that we would want to include. But thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that comment. It's actually in line with what I was going to say, that even though these guidelines are for evaluations, they have implications for the whole policy cycle. You can look at it from the planning point of view, the way budget. Okay, apologies for that. Budgeting, for implementation processes, the way we think about implementation processes, as well as monitoring and learning. So across the whole value chain of policy implementation. Michael, Leslie?
Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity and for the presentations. I think from my side, it's just to welcome the release of these guidelines and the work that's been done. We're currently working with other colleagues on the Just Transition Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Framework, and we see these guidelines as a great opportunity to be applied going forward in relation to the Just Transition. And so the timing is quite auspicious. And yeah, just want to say thanks and acknowledge the work that's done to get to this point, and for the guidance provided by DPME. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that comment. Then the other things that one might want to say is the issue of mainstreaming, especially when it comes to the transformative equity one. There are instruments already in government that have been introduced. You can think of the MTSF, the way it has mainstreamed the imperatives for designated groups, such as women, youth, persons with disability, and also the way it speaks about the spatial aspects. That there are these kind of attempts, not only this one, there are other examples also. There are these attempts at driving or transforming the way government programs are actually conceptualized and implemented to achieve specific outcomes for equity. Then the tendency also on the other side, that if programs are designed without those considerations in mind, there's always a reluctance to actually monitor performance of the program against those kind of requirements, which then it sort of reverses the whole discourse around how do we promote equity outcomes in the delivery of government programs. So these instruments are actually very useful if they can then be made, if we can raise awareness and ensure that the key principles are widely understood by not only evaluation practitioners, but also those that are affected by the evaluations, including also the people that must lobby programs to be implemented, or those that lobby programs, how they are designed, and those that are involved in the decisions about introduction of new programs. So I thought I should make that comment. Are there any other comments?
Good morning, DDG.
Let me ask
There's a comment in the chat.
In the chat. Give a chance to the presenters after that comment. Please read the comment.
Okay, it says my comment is around the criterion. The legislative or regulatory requirements is not included in the criteria. Is there any reason why?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. All right. I'll give the presenters to comment on that and also other issues that have come up in the meeting, the discussion.
Maybe just to start, I mean, one thing I would say is, potentially there are legislative issues which are relevant to different sectors. So it would be very complicated to cover all of them. We have mentioned, if you look in the guideline does refer to key legislation that's relevant, but it's not in the criteria because the criteria is trying to be quite compact. I don't know, Jen, if you want to add to that.
No, I'm good on that one.
And maybe just one thing to add is responding also to Mike. I mean, I'm actually 40% of my time is now in the presidency on the Climate Fund Jet IP program management unit, and we intend to try and see how we can apply these guidelines. So I think these potentially are going to have significant impact. But I think the DG's challenge on us finding training, which Rachela was referring to, is a real thing, area that DPME and SAMIA need to strategize and maybe get funding for now in terms of how we take this work forward.
And Ian, do you want to address Dr. Griesel's comment about planning?
Could you summarize what it was again? I missed it.
Well, I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer in full, but as a side response, just to say through SAMIA, we have a community of practice that is looking at monitoring evaluation for just transition. And within this community of practice and also within SAMIA's M&E for just transition portfolio, we've identified the issue of planning as an area that needs to be further developed. So in a lot of the discussions that we have had as the community of practice, there has been a comment about, well, how can we evaluate if it hasn't already been put into intervention design or evaluate the planning aspects of the interventions. And so it is an area that we are still working on in terms of integrating these criteria into the planning aspects and then also into the monitoring side. Sorry, you're muted.
I see there's a comment also on the chat by Dr. Griesel. Okay. DPME and SAMIA had agreed to collaborate on integration of just transition in the National Development Planning System. Okay, it's a comment. All right. Hello.
Thank you so much, DDG Mashamba. From my side, I wanted really to take this opportunity also to reiterate what Dr. Griesel said with colleagues in here to say that the need for us to incorporate or integrate this new criterion is quite critical, not only to evaluators or commissioners of evaluation, and I think members who serve in our internal bid specification committees and bid evaluation committees, because for them to understand the importance of integrating these criteria is quite critical, because we are starting to see them when they sit in those committees, sometimes not having that background of why an evaluation, for example, have to take a particular angle. So it will be quite critical for us to target our colleagues who are sitting in those committees as well. Thank you.
Okay, great point. Constance?
Thank you, Chen. Apologies for asking the question late. I was just thinking, one of the issues in terms of... There's no sound, colleagues. Can you hear me?
I can hear
Hello?
you.
We
Can you hear
you.
me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Clearly.
Yes, okay. One of the issues that usually hamper the effective of M&E programs is the availability of data. So I just wanted to find out from this forum, anyone who can maybe take the question, if the guidelines somehow assist in facilitating data for the M&E, for the evaluation of such programs, particularly in this space. Data availability is an issue. So other than the general actions that we do in asking departments to make sure that data is available and is accessible, is there anything else that can be done to facilitate that process? Thank you.
All right, I'll ask volunteers to that question. Dan, you want to come?
So, I think, Constance, I think it's a really good question. I think what we're going to have to do is start exploring with some of these first evaluations where it's pushing us to get additional data. So, for example, the most basic equity data would be, the gender breakdown. Then it starts to be, well, maybe it's about place, maybe it's about income levels or class or some other. So I think what it's pushing us is to say that we need to start looking at other sources of data which may not traditionally be collected, but maybe we do need to start collecting. And I think that's going to be, if these are such critical issues, then we need to be collecting data on them. So I think it's an area to explore, and it'd be great if you could play a role in sort of leading on thinking about how we do that.
Yeah, I might add to then say, in some cases it will be because there are pre-existing programs and interventions which we expect through this guideline, if you evaluate them, you would obviously ask questions around transformative equity. You would obviously ask questions around environmental sustainability and all those kind of effects, retrospectively so. So that then might create challenges of data. But on new programs, an opportunity is there for forward thinking in terms of how the design and the objectives of specific interventions are defined, and how the data processes are designed to then collect certain types of data, which then later would contribute to a evaluation that will answer these questions in much more easier fashion. Okay. Are there any other comments? As well as the improvement plans. Thank you. Dr. Griza?
Thank you. I think this is a very important discussion, because the reality is that currently in government, we don't really have a standard as to the manner in which programs should be designed. We do obviously always talk about theory of change, and that a program should be designed based on the theory of change. Data should be collected in order to test the causality of that theory of change, and it should be an iterative, adaptive management approach. So what we are doing here, we're starting with the evaluation side, whereas in fact there's a need for a overhaul and almost retrofitting of programs. And that has been a project that DPME had identified, but did not embark on due to capacity issues. But it's still something that we should be keeping on our radar, so that we have evaluability, because I think any program as we know, the data availability is the issue of evaluability, so that we find that we want to do an evaluation, but in fact there's insufficient data, or the data has not been collected. And part of that is also what we have been focusing on, is the whole issue of the dominance. We've allowed collectively the dominance of the planning for audit, which dominates departments, and even the way in which we collect data of programs, planning for audit rather than planning for development, planning for results. So that's something that I think collectively, even though that's not the specific topic of this engagement, so what that planning for audit does, it impacts also on the way in which program managers function, in terms of they tend to focus on performance information that is required by the Auditor General, rather than performance information that will enable them to better manage, adjust, adaptive management of their programs towards the achievement of development results. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Dukulelo?
Thank you for the opportunity. Good morning, colleagues. I was just trying to say, as DSD, we had an opportunity to be part of the pilot on the transformative equity and climate ecosystems health guidelines. Though the process came in after we had finalized the TORs, but we had an opportunity to feature it in when we were doing the inception report during inception, sorry. So going forward, we are also including these guidelines when we do the other terms of reference. So I think they were quite helpful during that process when we did the evaluation on food and nutrition program. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Can you please mute? Yeah, thank you very much. I don't know, Thokozile, if you have any comments. We want to run to a close now. If you have any parting shot before I can actually summarize.
In engagement with Professor Goldman in terms of training on these two guidelines, and we are also planning to have a session in our upcoming national evaluation seminar on this. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, that will then I take forward the issue that came through in this discussion, that there is a need for raising awareness about not only the existence of these guidelines, that these guidelines are there, but the principles, to make sure that they are widely understood by actors not only in the space of evaluation, the practitioners, but also those that are affected by the evaluations. It's very important that we do that, but also wider diffusion in terms of, I know in the international space, we are already talking to other actors in that space, sharing these guidelines to see how they can use them in their own circumstances, which is very important. The discourse with the likes of the OECD, people that are playing in that space of the OECD DAC criteria, that in the way that the development assistant evaluation guidelines are framed, there might be a need going forward to then say, what do other practitioners say about these new developments in the space of evaluations? Yeah, so these are lessons from the South. we might want to say, which we are sharing with the world. Other things that I can pick up in terms of summarizing the discussion, let me just maybe thank you, all of you who have made time to attend, but most importantly, the acknowledgement to the all people that have contributed to the conceptualization, the drafting, the review of these guidelines. More work is ahead. We are not done yet. Introducing the guidelines is just one step, but applying them in the way that leads to the impact that we're looking for, as we have heard from various contributors in the discussion, that it's about how this set of guidelines influence the thinking of policymakers, of evaluators, of data systems, how they're designed to collect information that provide new insights in terms of whether the interventions are actually responding to these new aspirations. They are not actually new, existential issues that if you don't have inclusive societies, you run a risk of many, many other challenges. Also, if you don't care about the environment in the way you think about interventions and how you implement them, you are not progressive in a way. I think Jan used the words of regenerative, degenerative, in those kind of words. You are choosing to be the opposite of what progressive should be. So, colleagues, let me then wrap up the discussion. Maybe let me give a chance, Jan and Ian, if you have parting shots before I can close the meeting.
Well, just from my side, I think, you know, if the collaboration with DPME has been excellent through this process, and I think it's a great example. As you say, Godfrey, we are actually pioneering internationally in this work, and the main challenge is, you know, having the sufficient resources to make it happen, which is exactly what you said. This is just the first step. So Samir and DPME need to plan for that.
Yes, and just on my side, just to echo that, thank you very much for this opportunity, and we really, as Samir, really look forward to continuing to partner with DPME and with other departments, and also these guidelines are available, can be used by independent evaluators as well. So we really look forward to continuing this journey where we can really look to see how we can apply these criteria to evaluations for the improvement of programming and the improvement of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Chair of Samir, do you want to say maybe one or two words before we close? Gweza?
Yes, thank you, Chair. For me, it's just to reiterate what has been said by colleagues, that the collaboration, this is, like you said, the start. We need more partnership, funds, resources to push this work forward, and also to acknowledge the fact that good things are coming. You know, you said knowledge from the South, but really that we are pioneering in this space, and this should be something that can be replicated across many other sections and departments and areas of work. But very well done to everybody involved, and looking forward to seeing how, you know, this multiplies across the continent and the world, actually. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of the launch session. Till we meet again when we are implementing these guidelines. Thank you very much, colleagues. The session is adjourned.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.